Thank you very much indeed. And for the 10th time, we're looking at government proposals in relation to this issue. So we have been looking at them time and time again. I want to say for over 6 months, the government has been saying that it understands the scale of public anger about Irish water and water charges. There have been constant meetings of the Cabinet and Cabinet subcommittees to find a way off the hook. This issue was central to a budget announced little over a month ago. After large-scale demonstrations throughout the country, there have been emergency meetings, and there has been a desperate scramble to rescue Irish water. So, Taoiseach, this is not about Irish Water Mark II. It's a desperate scramble to rescue the government from the mess it created itself. And for all of this, the crisis will continue, because the government will still not acknowledge that its entire water policy is a shambles and should be scrapped. This will not be the final instalment or announcement, because it leaves in place a policy which wastes large amounts of public money, is inefficient, and still obliges people to pay for unacceptably poor services and poor water quality. Now, the Animal Farm, George Orwell's Animal Farm, is on the junior certificate in 2015. And his spirit is alive and well, given the Orwellian language used by government spokespeople, ministers and the Taoiseach and Taoiseach today. If you stand back from it and stand back from the politics, I have never witnessed such a complex payment method in all my life. That you actually say, we put out a bill for €260 and we'll send out from another department a cheque for €100, and you call it a water conservation bill? That's as Orwellian as it gets. It's just incredible. It's not that. I'd scrap the whole bloody thing. For the sake of 100 million?
We do have.
For the sake of 100 million? No one's ever witnessed this before, Taoiseach. We're going to give you a bill for 260, and we're going to give you a water conservation grant for 100 on the other hand. It's just risible. And less than a year ago, the government was pushing through legislation with claims that would herald a new and positive era for water services. I mean, the speeches we've heard now, Taoiseach and Taoiseach, we heard a year ago. Speaker after speaker from the government benches hailed their visionary leadership and claimed that everything would be transparent, fair and deliver public confidence. It didn't. It sapped public confidence. And after the latest of a dozen U-turns and a massive climb down, we're still left with charges for a flawed service and an expensive, unnecessary and arrogant bureaucracy. We now have the absurd situation where £500 million is to be spent on installing meters which are no longer needed, or no longer have a purpose. And stop the fig leaf that you've introduced today. This is a scandalous waste of money. And I challenge you to allow the Controller and Auditor General to do a report on the establishment costs of Irish water, and to further investigate the awarding of the contracts and so forth, and the whole idea of water meters without due diligence in advance. Because this is a very serious issue in terms of the £500 million, that's €500 million, that will not be used. Don't be bluffing us with the €60 charge and saying someone will save something under €60. It's a very serious issue. It's a very serious issue now, given what the government has announced today. Because no amount of camouflage will take away from the reality that £500 million has been, and the remainder is to be spent in contracts they can't get out of, or we don't know, there's no transparency around it, because commercial sensitivity is used as a cover to hide it all. If you're talking seriously about transparency, can we see what the government is hooked? What is the government exposed to? What is it on the hook for in terms of water meter contracts and the bill and so on like that? Because up to 219, it's a capped charge. Let us call. So that's not the response to this, Taoiseach. That is not the response to this. That's no answer, Taoiseach, to this. That is no answer to the key point I'm making. Through the chair, that is no answer through the chair. Through the chair, it's no answer to the very fundamental point I'm making about the £500 million. And in addition to that, we are paying for the construction of a billing infrastructure which is not needed. Extraordinary billing infrastructure. And now we have a regulator which will not be regulating. What was the role of the regulator in all of this for the last month? Can someone tell me? The regulator wasn't even mentioned in the last month in terms of the newest iteration of what we heard. And the charge which the government continues to obstinately insist on will bring in a paltry amount of money, and do so at the maximum possible cost. You are spending a fortune to bring in a negligible amount of revenue. That's actually what is being proposed by the government. At less than 0.3% of the general government budget deficit, it shows an almost perverse insistence on maintaining a policy which not only has no public legitimacy, it will continue to cause serious damage. The net effect of the latest government policy will be that scarce resources will be diverted from vital public services in order to fund Irish Water's work. The only credible policy now is to call a halt to Irish Water and the charges, to scrap them and to stop the damage now, rather than wait for the inevitable final climb down next year. Today was supposed to be about drawing a line under the issue, and all it has done is to keep it going. From the very beginning, the government has tried to claim that there was no alternative to this policy. They said it was the only way to get essential funding and to improve services. This was false when the policy was announced, and it has been proven to the extent that even the former Fine Gael minister responsible for this policy has admitted all of what I'm saying by describing it as, quote, an unmitigated disaster. Through the Chair, Taoiseach, has any member of government met Deputy O'Dowd? Through the Chair, did Minister Kelly meet Deputy O'Dowd? Did they ask him to elaborate on why he believes this policy was an unmitigated disaster? This is no accidental shambles. It's not an unexpected policy error. The establishment of Irish Water and everything it has done was set up by Fine Gael before the general election. In fact, it is one of the longest established and most detailed parts of Fine Gael policy, and it was incorporated in full in the programme for government in spite of Labour's pre-election promise to veto it. And the Taoiseach didn't mention the Tesco ad and the very clear promise that they will stop Fine Gael from doing this. Within a day of the election, that obviously evaporated. There is nothing in the now-ended Troika agreement which obliged the government to proceed as it has done. And it is now over a year since the government began a 3-month celebration of how that agreement was over. The scale and intensity of public resistance to Irish Water and these charges have been clear since Deputy Barry Cowan began forcing the Minister for the Environment and Irish Water to answer specific questions about their work. What was supposed to be a low-cost, highly effective entity was exposed as a highly wasteful and ineffective bureaucracy offering indecent bonuses and focused primarily on creating an infrastructure for charging people for water rather than delivering them clean and reliable water supplies. The particular intensity of the reaction is not solely because of the charges or the waste at Irish Water. It is because of the cumulative impact of government policy. As every independent study has confirmed, the only decisive shift in policy when Fine Gael and Labour came to office was that they introduced significantly more unfair and regressive budgets, and this is independently analysed. From day one, their policy has been to place a larger burden on those with middle and lower incomes, and that's without question. The one consistent part of their policy has been to ignore the ability of people to pay when introducing and extending taxes and charges. This was also combined with non-stop spin from the government about how, contrary to the evidence, people should thank them for being fair and visionary. And that is why the water charges became the last straw. An unfair and wasteful policy constantly sold as progressive and visionary. Of course, people were going to be alienated, and they were not going to stand for it. The protest of people was seen in their votes in the local elections and has been unmistakable since. And let us be clear, even though some candidates and parties have tried to exploit the issue, there is a genuine, widespread and entirely legitimate public opposition to this policy. The aggressive behaviour seen on some protests in the last week does not reflect the broad mass of the public's approach. There are some who cynically want to be in democratic assemblies, yet at the same time pretend to be outside them. If you're elected to this House, you don't need a bullhorn to be heard. Although I will say this much, the behaviour of Minister Kelly here today undermines the legitimacy of this Parliament and undermines, unfortunately, the legitimacy of the point I am making. Because if the Minister and the Government continues to treat the House with contempt, then you just give fuel to the argument that you're better off doing protests and something outside. And I would like the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach to take that on board. There's nothing peaceful about trapping someone in their car for 2 hours. I said that unequivocally. And there's nothing democratic or legitimate about harassing a public official as they carry out their public duties. In this country, there are more than enough opportunities for people to have their voices heard without resorting to aggression. No one who participated in any of the actions which have rightly been deplored can say that they have no alternative. If certain political parties were genuinely sincere about supporting the public's outrage on this issue, rather than trying to exploit it for their own ends, they would allow genuine local voices, people who are members of no party, to be heard more, rather than looking for opportunities to promote their own candidates. At the core of this shambles of a policy is Fine Gael's New Era policy, first launched in 2009. In this, they introduced the idea of placing more services into commercial holding companies and funding investment through a combination of the sale of state assets and charges. As we've seen in relation to gas supplies in our forests, there had been a creeping privatisation agenda implemented from the government's first days in office. There's been no commitment to the idea of how, as a small and peripheral country, the impact of commercial monopolies on public services could prove disastrous in terms of both costs and services. There has been a refusal to commit to the long-term future of maintaining state assets. As things stand, there's no investment case for Irish water. There's no water quality case for Irish water, and there's no fairness case for Irish water. All there is a wasteful and damaging quango which should be abolished before it does more damage and wastes more public funds. It's also obvious that there's been a consistent policy of giving Bord Gáis preferential treatment. The only independent review of policy which the government allowed, which was carried out by PwC, explicitly recommended against attaching Irish water to Bord Gáis. They said that it would be wasteful and an inefficient approach, and they gave 17 disadvantages listed as to why you should not proceed in this way, yet the government proceeded anyway. And we also know that the government worked to withhold for as long as possible details of the costs associated with Irish water and excluded other potential operators without detailed consideration. Why has Fine Gael in particular been so eager to put Irish water under the control of Bord Gáis? Why has it moved so quickly to do so? And why has it spent so much time defending the decisions? I think it is owed to the Irish people to explain to them where the ideas for the New Era approach came from and what discussions were held by Fine Gael with Bord Gáis before and after the general election. And who did Minister Coveney consult with before drawing up this particular proposal? I'd like answers to that question, Taoiseach. Our system of water supply needs investment. No one questions that. However, it is absolutely untrue to say that there was no investment in the past, and there can be no investment without starting first with a policy of establishing Irish water and introducing charges. As Deputy Cowan has said, over $5 billion was invested between 2000 and 2010, and there were substantial improvements to our water supply system and to wastewater treatment plants across the country. And that should be acknowledged. That should be acknowledged. You talked about the 1,000 jobs at Bristol Myers Squibb. Bristol Myers Squibb wouldn't come in here with a pharmaceutical plant if there wasn't confidence in our public water utility system. And all the various bio plants that came in over the last decade wouldn't have come in either. And I know because I was a Minister for Enterprise and Trade at the time, and it never featured as a negative. So let's have balance and perspective in this debate. And stop trying to over-egg the pudding in terms of justifying the attempt to rescue yourselves from the mess that you've created. From day one, we've pointed out that a policy of fix it first was the only way to proceed. And this is now truer than ever. The case for Irish water falls apart when you see that most of the planned improvement work for the water network is to be undertaken by the existing structures. The water staff of local authorities are the ones who, under the current plans, will deliver the improved service which has been promised. Irish Water's principal activity is actually the construction of a method for metering and billing. Its only significant contracts and investments relate to metering and billing. Irish Water will not in itself or on its own do anything at all to improve water quality and supply. And the worst common thing is another figure. That's already in train before Irish Water was ever established. It was in train before Irish Water was established, Taoiseach. In fact, Irish Water will divert significant public funding from other services. There was a time when the government intended to raise 300 million per year in charges and to take 500 to 600 million off the general government balance and general government debt. It was argued that this freed up money for other services. That's no longer the case. While the formal decision on how the debts of Irish Water will be treated will be made by Eurostat next March, today's announcement questions whether the accounting exercise trick will actually work. And there's a general issue here, Taoiseach. I mentioned it's only 0.3% now of overall general government deficit. But Eurostat and your institutions need to cop on, and governments need to cop on. We're fooling nobody with this kind of stuff. This is the Irish people's debt, ultimately. It's a bit like, prostitution and and research and development magically being reclassified by Eurostat. And lo and behold, your deficit is reduced by 2 billion, just like that. You know, that's what happened. That undermines confidence in official stats. And this kind of constancy trick is in the same genre. And if we want people to have faith and confidence in European institutions and in how we do our business, we need to sort this out as well. Because no one actually is fooled by the reality behind these figures. If the investment remains and the charge remains capped, the shortfall will have to come from somewhere. It will have to come from government funding, and therefore will be accounted for in the normal public finances. And that will mean money coming from other services. It's an accounting trick which is backfiring, something which is now common from a government which refuses to do even basic long-term planning. One of the most appalling things about this shambles is that huge public funding will continue to flow to install meters even though there's no need for those meters. Contracts for 500 million have been signed. Is it not close to obscene that, given the scale of investment needs in our economy, that the installation of water meters will now be eating up funding which will be going into improving vital services? No one has addressed that today from the government side in any shape or form, and I think it's a very serious issue. And Minister Kelly spoke about legacy. That could well be the legacy emanating from today's announcements. A waste of 500 million that has no measurable benefit whatsoever. Today's package has been put together in a panic, and it will not last. It leaves in place charges for a failing service, and it entrenches the position of Irish Water. Instead of putting in place the most complex system of charging for water ever invented, and I don't think anybody can doubt that, for the sake of a paltry amount which will be collected at great cost, the policy and proposals and the charges should be scrapped, and you should go back to the drawing board. Irish Water should also be scrapped immediately. It has no substantive role to play. It's fatally defined by the arrogance of the government and the hubris of those who established it. We do not need a company like this. It's not required to improve services and increase efficiencies. Its primary purpose was always to make it fit for privatisation. Fine Gael and Labour were wrong to establish it. Sinn Féin were wrong this September when they called for it to be retained. I know today the Sinn Féin spokesman said they believe now it should be abolished as well. Given Sinn Féin's obsession with what Deputy Adams calls electoralism, this policy may have changed his own position in relation to whether and where he would pay the charge. As Fianna Fáil pointed out before, the alternative is to establish a different type of public utility. We have experience of success in the past, for example, the National Roads Authority. And this type of utility format would provide greater regional coordination and investment and avoid the commercial mentality which has given us the bloated bonus culture and focus on billing which we've seen in Irish Water. This government refused to listen to the opposition on the 19th of December last year. They rammed through the Water Services Bill in 3.75 hours. They refused any amendments and even refused to listen to criticism and worries from their own backbenchers. They are now reaping the rewards for this bullheadedness and arrogance. This has been a massive climb down by the government, and it was forced within 11 months of a bill being voted by the government and its backbenchers through this Dáil. This is a masterpiece in failure, and the pause button should be pressed before any more taxpayers' money is wasted. The government has yet to explain what incentives there are there for people to conserve water, or how much they're actually going to invest in infrastructure. We've had no detail to date on anything for over 12 months in terms of the water. All we get is you bending about figures, Taoiseach, about 1 billion, or sorry, 10 billion, 20 billion. No real detail on the thing. They prefer to pick out tens of billions out of the sky without having any specific information in what is needed or what will be spent. The government has to wait until next March before they are told whether they can borrow off balance sheet, which we are still being told is the main reason now for setting up Irish Water in the first place. At the same time, the government are continuing to pay back interest, 20 million on the 500 million loan borrowed to install the meters that are now required. That's an interest loan on the MPRF is 20 million per annum on the meters. It's not just the 500 million and so forth. And in addition, of course, the... Sorry?
Well, don't you start talking about attitude. 4 years here.
Former Minister Dáil, I think Taoiseach summed it up. I actually think he was right. When he, what's your view of Deputy Dáil? When he described, do you want to interrupt me and comment on Deputy Dáil?
No.
When he described...
In actual fact, I'll control that if you would continue and conclude.
Okay.
Time is up.
Former Minister Dáil was right, I would suggest, Tánaiste and Taoiseach, when he described the setting up of Irish Water as an unmitigated disaster. And unless the government stops all of this now, we will have more of the same into the future. Thank you very much, Micheál Martin.